The morning sun cast long, golden fingers to the tall, arched windows of the Grand Hall of Justice, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the quiet air. This was a place where stories collided, where the fragments of broken relationships were brought to be examined under the steady, unwavering light of the law. There was a rhythmic hum to the building, a sense of order that stood in stark contrast to the emotional chaos often brought within its walls. On this particular day, the courtroom was prepared for the business of healing through justice, led by a figure whose reputation for fairness and sharp wit preceded her. The bailiff called the court to order with a voice that echoed authority and tradition. "All rise," he commanded, and the gallery stood in unison as the judge entered. "Have a seat, please," she said, her voice a calm but firm anchor in the room. This was the star of case number 3061, a matter involving Alejandro Maravilla and his former wife, Ana Maravilla. They stood on opposite sides of the room, separated by more than just the wooden partitions. They were joined by the history of marriage that had lasted 3 years, and more importantly, by the life of a 3-year-old boy who was currently the center of their world. The judge began by establishing the facts with the precision of a master weaver. "You and the defendant are now divorced," she noted, looking at Alejandro. "You have one child, a son who is 3 going on 4. The boy lived primarily with his mother, a situation dictated by their custody agreement. However, the peace of that agreement had been shattered during a recent exchange. Alejandro alleged that it had taken a considerable amount of time to enforce his visitation rights, and it was during the very first weekend he was meant to have his son for an overnight stay that the conflict erupted. He claimed that Ana had keyed his electric car, a Tesla, out of malice or emotional distress. Alejandro recounted the events of that afternoon. He had arrived at Ana's home early, his heart filled with the nervous excitement of spending a full weekend with his son. He had placed the boy in his car seat, securing the buckles with the care of a father who wanted everything to be perfect. But then something shifted. Ana, overwhelmed by the impending departure of her child for the first time, took the boy out of the seat. She explained to court that she felt a deep sadness. "I was kind of sad," she whispered, her voice trembling. She wanted one more hug, one more moment to say goodbye. But the child began to scream, sensing the tension. The judge leaned forward, her expression softening with a touch of educational sternness. "You do know that your hysteria was traumatic for a 3-year-old, she said, addressing Ana. The child was already in the car, ready for his journey. To pull him back out into an atmosphere of crying and distress creates a lasting impression of fear. It is the responsibility of parents to love their child more than they dislike each other in those difficult moments." As the story unfolded, Alejandro described a loud scraping sound, like a sharp object being dragged across metal. He looked back to find a significant scratch on the side of his car. Ana denied the act, claiming she was merely closing the door and felt intimidated by the situation. However, the evidence began to speak for itself. There was a video, a digital witness to the moment. The judge watched carefully, frame by frame, as a hand moved against the car. She also reviewed a police report where Ana had initially admitted she might have accidentally caused the damage, promising to pay for it just to end the confrontation with the 20 officers who had eventually arrived on the scene. But the car was only part of the story. Alejandro was also suing for assault. He described another exchange where the tension boiled over once more. This time, it involved a support check. In a moment of perhaps unnecessary irritation, Alejandro had written the check using Ana's maiden name, Sanchez, instead of the married name she still legally used while the divorce remained unfinalized. This small detail acted as a spark. Ana had approached him aggressively, and Wade began to record the encounter on his phone for protection. A scuffle ensued. Alejandro claimed she hit him and scratched his back, an act also captured on camera. The judge was unwavering in her lesson. "You can't put your hands on somebody," she stated clearly. "No matter how much a person might provoke you with words or minor irritations like the name on a check, the physical boundary is sacred. To violate that is to step into the realm of assault, and there are consequences for such actions." She found that Alejandro's recording was a reasonable measure for protection in a public space, and that Ana's reaction was an unjustified use of force. After weighing the evidence of the damaged car, and the physical altercation, the judge issued a judgment for plaintiff in the amount of $2,500. Anna's counterclaims were dismissed. As they prepared to leave, the judge offered a final piece of wisdom, a reminder that they were still bound together by their son. She encouraged him to move past the anger and focus on the positive future of the child they both clearly loved. The courtroom transition was seamless as the next story began to take shape. Case number 3055 involved Joy Mello and Larry Pilgrim. Miss Mello was a woman whose face was etched with the lines of a deep, enduring sorrow. She was suing her former attorney for the cost of a suit her son had worn during a murder trial in 2021. Her son had been convicted and was currently serving a sentence of 50 years to life. Miss Mello explained that she had worked 3 jobs to pay for the trial and to buy the civilian clothes so that her son could appear in court with dignity. She believed the attorney was responsible for returning the $700 suit to her after the trial ended. Mr. Pilgrim, however, explained that once a prisoner is remanded, their civilian clothes often disappear into the vast system of the prison, often donated or lost in transition. He did not have the clothes and was not a custodian of personal property. The judge listened with profound empathy. She recognized that Miss Mello's quest for the $700 was not truly about the money or the fabric. It was about the grief of losing a son to a life sentence. "You have every right to be sad," the judge said gently, "but your anger is directed at the wrong person." The clothes were a symbol of a mother's love and effort, but the lawyer was not responsible for their loss after the son was convicted by 12 people and sentenced for an egregious crime. The judge explained that people often find it easier to deal with anger than with the overwhelming weight of sadness. By focusing on a vendetta over used clothing, Miss Mello was trying to find a target for a pain that was otherwise too large to carry. The case was dismissed, not because the judge didn't care, but because the law could not provide a remedy for a broken heart. As the court adjourned, the participants walked out into the afternoon light. There was a sense of resolution in the air, a feeling that while not every problem had a simple fix, the truth had been spoken. The lessons remained. Respect the boundaries of others. Direct your emotions toward their true source. And always, above all, prioritize the well-being of the next generation. The Grand Hall of Justice remained a silent witness to these human struggles, ready to welcome the next story with the same promise of fairness and the hope for a more peaceful tomorrow.